All right, so we're going to do another one. We're going to cover cleanse. And by the way, welcome back to another episode with the Shades of Dominion and spell template creation. We're going over the racist cards, the banned cards from Magic the Gathering, who decided these cards were too hot for print, that they were guilty of racismus, as V likes to say. This is cleanse. And before we get into the actual card itself, my God, the absolute stupidity surrounding this card. Okay, in Shades of Dominion, they're not the different five colors are not called white, black, blue, so on and so forth. White is known as purity, and black is called corruption, which makes sense given this card. But the card itself says cleanse. All black creatures in play are destroyed. The absolute retardation of Magic the Gathering banning this card because it says all black creatures is because in the context of Magic the Gathering, saying all black creatures does not mean literal black people. Black creatures, or if in Shades of Dominion, the creatures of corruption, the shade summons of corruption, those of a corruption alignment. These are cultists, assassins, ne'er do wells, thugs. Okay, now I'm starting to see how it makes sense. But not just that. We're talking about like zombies, so evil spirits, ghouls, vampires, the the truly evil and dark shit of the world, the things that go bump in the night. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about quote unquote cleansing. We're not talking about literal black people. We're talking about uh, the the literal evil incarnate when it comes to black creatures. But I'm actually excited for this episode because I actually get to do a spell, not a global enchantment that gets turned into a character aspect that you have to rewire uh in the terms of turning it into a feat. You actually have this is something we'll actually turn into a spell template. So beginning with the shade cost, we're going to take it that cleanse is a 2 planes and 2 other, which is a converted mana cost of 4. Now, I have here the Law of Common, which is the conversion chart. Now, Cleanse is a rare. And rarely going through this old cards are we going to get to the Mythic, because their Mythic didn't exist back then. So we're only dealing with rares when it comes to these uber powerful cards. So let's do this. So common, it's 1. Uncommon is a common times 1.5. So that brings the shade cost up to 6. But because it's a rare, we have to go down to the next step, which is uncommon times 2. So the total shade cost is 12. Which, given the effect of this in a roleplay sense, genuinely makes sense. This is a card that if the players were to hypothetically walk into an infested graveyard or some crypt or some a nest filled with the creatures of the night, the creatures of corruption, those of a corruption um, status, this would make sense. So it's going to be a shade cost of 12. And the spell type is a sorcery. Now, in the Shades of Dominion, there are the sorceries in Magic the Gathering are only spells that you can only play on your turn. Well, in Shades of Dominion, this is represented in uh, actions that you can take. There are free actions, there are half actions, there are full actions, and generally everything falls in those different categories. There's also a reaction for your combat. This specifically is going to be a half action. or something you can do on your turn in addition to an attack or a spell battery roll, which is also another way. Spell battery rolls is the draw mechanic, remembering or recharging a spell. And spells that take a half action to cast are called channeled spells. So that's the spell type. Now for the spell placement, or not the spell placement, the spell effect, this is actually a little more nuanced. This is going to be a little more difficult to display because in Magic the Gathering, you have uh, creature cards, and these creature cards represent the creatures that you can summon. In Shades of Dominion, there are two types of uh, creatures. There are natural creatures, which you would meet just going about the world, and then there are your shade summons. These are creatures which can have inherent toughness, but all of your shade summons typically have only one wound, because in the Shades of Dominion, natural creatures are more resilient, whereas shade summons are just things that you summon forth from the ether. They have a very low constitution. They only need to take one wound before they dissipate back into shade. So this spell effect is going to be a little, not tricky, but a little more appropriate for the topic at hand, because Cleanse deals primarily in annihilating uh, creatures of a corruption type, but it's also, we're going to presume, creatures with with one wound, but we're also going to give an effect that also has an effect against creatures that are natural but still of the corruption um, uh, persuasion, shall we say. So what we're going to do is all creatures, I'm sorry, all targets of this spell. No, that's not accurate. Do every. How do I put this? Every NPC? No, I don't want it just to be NPCs, because that's not accurate either. Okay. Everything. Everything in combat. That actually works. That is far more appropriate. Everything in combat, because this is the current battlefield, so to speak. So everything in combat that is corruption stained. Everything that is corruption stained loses one wound and is exhausted. Now, for those of you who are questioning what this means, everything in combat that is corruption stained loses one wound and is exhausted. Now, what this means is that everything that is a shade summon is going to be automatically killed. Everything else is going to lose a wound and be ready to be killed, because when a target is exhausted, they are going attacking them is a automatic success, and B deals max damage. That is the consequence of attacking an exhausted target, and that's why in the Shades of Dominion, your action economy and choosing to exhaust yourself after an attack it has to be an extremely uh, carefully thought out tactical choice, because that is how combat is done in Shades of Dominion. So losing a wound and being exhausted is a major thing. Now, another possibility, that's one possibility that we have on the table. Another possibility that we could entertain is everything in combat that is corruption stained loses wounds equal to the amount of purity shade spent to cast this spell. We have two alternate variations of this. Now, for the cost of 12 shade, I'm actually going to choose the second. I'm actually going to go with everything loses wounds equal to the amount of purity shade spent to cast this spell. That's what we're going to be, because that's what the mana the shade cost indicates. Now, when we say shade cost, it's going to be a converted shade cost of 12. However, when it comes to the actual purity shade that is required, we can put that up to, well, let's see. Okay, we have the 1 here, 1.5. So we have at least 3 times 2. So we're going to have 6 purity plus 6 other. Now, the other can be unstained shade. That is a possibility. So, when we break up the shade cost, it's going to be 6 purity minimum and 6 others. So we actually have a spell that will deal 6 wounds to everything that is corruption stained. Now, that is a lot of wounds. That's essentially clearing the board. Very few things have more than 6 wounds. But the potential is that they could do a lot more. And it is likely that the Shade Mage casting the spell, with the ability to cast this spell, is going to be able to put in a lot more than 6 purity. They will probably be able to put in at least 10 purity if they're able to cast this spell. Placement is going to be where you would find such a spell template. What is it made out of? As we've noticed before, in the Purity Dominion, there is light, order, and protection. And I'll be very, 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 very honest. I feel this is a light 12. And what that means is uh, you would need a shade capacity, which is not the total score in light. You would need a shade capacity of uh, 12 in light to be able to cast this spell. That's a lot of character development in the Shades of Dominion to be able to cast such a spell. But it's worth getting to, as you can tell by this spell effect. Being able to deal wounds to a specific faction of the Shades of Dominion, and to be able to deal that much massive damage as a half action, totally worth it. Absolutely, totally worth it. And you will be, if you walk into the graveyard and the zombies are popping out of the ground, and then the demon swings by and just roars into the air. Casting this spell will will solve your problem in the tabletop just as much as it would in the card game. And I call that a success. That is a success. This is a flavor win in terms of representing what this card is supposed to do versus what we've actually uh, what was represented on in the card game. So this has been Cleanse. And that's it, guys. Remember to spend some time today to throw some shade. Bye-bye.